Welcome, everyone. I think we're joining and we are just running a minute or so behind. We were working out a few technical glitches. I'm hoping everyone's able to get on and join us here as we let the others kind of continue to enter. So we're going to go through a few of our details here, just our run of show, what we're doing in just a second. We're just waiting for everyone to pop on. We'll talk about the chat feature too, but if you want to start using that, feel free to let us know you're here. That's totally fine as well. So I'll give it just another 10 to 15 seconds, and then we'll just dive in and start to move forward. Great, I see a chat. Thank you, Mary. Perfect. So that means it's kind of working here. So now let's just tell you, you may know this topic. Let's hope you've got an idea of why we're here, but we're ready to discuss climate shift. And with the thought, is this increasing the diversity of styles and quality for both Bordeaux and Germany or not? So that's what we're working on today. You may be thinking about Clink different and what that means with both Bordeaux and Germany, but this is a joint project with funding from the EU simply because the wine styles are so different and non-competing. So they're working to help draw attention to both simultaneously. That's where we got this theme. Now, we will move on to the next point here, a little bit of housekeeping on the slide. You may have noticed when you popped on and saw that we're recording, we're doing that for record keeping, quality assurance. We'll probably have this available for your review, so that's another reason to record it. So just keep that in mind that it is being recorded. Now we'll move on here to our next housekeeping and the next slide. So with that, we really want you to use the chat feature, not Q&A. Now, the fun aspect about this is we have 4 amazing growers and winery experts with us. So they're going to help intervene with this chat the whole time. Now, we'll get you started with a little bit of practice. So we've got a pop-up here for starting this chat. Keep in mind, we want you to use the chat, not the Q&A. We're going to also handle a section of questions and answers towards the end. But right now, if you have a question, I guarantee you there's probably one of our winemakers that'll pop in and take that question for you. Now, we'll move on just again here to let you know who's with us today. We have Jean-Jacques Dubourdieu. That's the eponymous name that you may know from his father, Domaine Denis Dubourdieu. Hi, Jean-Jacques, welcome.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me.
We're glad you're here. And next from Bordeaux is Pauline Lapierre-Dietrich. So she is joining us from Chateau Orion. And thank you for joining us, Pauline.
Hello, everyone. Thanks.
Wonderful. Now, one of our German growers, Christian Dotel. Thank you, Christian, for joining us at Weingut Dotel. Say hello.
Hi, thank you everybody for coming. Nice to be here.
Perfect. And last but not least, we have Alexander Lorch. The picture here is Mr. Lergenmuller. That is the winery that's featured. Alexander is the export manager. And we were having a little bit of glitch with his camera. So he's going to have this nice voiceover that you'll recognize because it will be different from all the rest. You may not see him. We haven't gotten his camera to work so far. Alexander, say hello.
Hello, everyone. Pleasure to join in. Thanks for the invitation. And we have a lot of fun for the afternoon and hopefully learn a lot of things. And I'm sure Laura is really leading us through the way. Thanks, everyone.
And we see you now, or at least I do. So that's a welcome.
That's right. I'm right here now.
Perfect. Great. Wonderful. So this is our esteemed panel, and we'll keep moving forward with the flow of what we'll discuss today. So on the next slide, we've got our layout. We'll definitely touch on the background real quick for this climate shift, a little bit of the details, the foundation. Now we'll bring in the growers with our adaptive measures. What we're going to discuss in the vineyard and the cellar both. Then we're going to have everyone kind of comment on style and quality. I have some ideas on that too, but I know that they especially do. I will kind of fine tune for the wine program, whether this is on premise, off premise. We'll touch on that briefly. Then we're going to open it up to you with Q&A, more of that, because we know there's going to be lots of questions. That's our agenda. So hang on, here we go. We are going to discuss the climate shift. And first we'll talk about this backdrop. Now, I don't think it's any mystery, especially with what we've been seeing in the news with the weather and the craziness that's just occurred in Belgium and Germany. We're going to not touch on that at this second. It's really just to remind you that we're already in full swing of climate shift. Now, the slide that you see here, this is pretty fascinating work. And there's a lot of work both in Germany and Bordeaux. This just happened to stand out to me as an easy to read, quick reveal of what we're looking at. To give you an idea here, the greenish portion is with a little bit of implementation of measures mitigating our carbon footprint. That's what we can do if we work with our carbon footprint now. The red is if we don't do anything. So keep in mind, we're showing you a couple of extremes, and this is going into the year of 2100. I do know that's 80 years away. We have to keep thinking for the future. Now, if we look at the second portion to the right of the slide, that is the projection of growing degree days. This is taken from probes placed throughout Saint-Emilion, and I think it's about 100 plus probes that they've been following to show you how fast the progression of degree days are growing. So on the left, of course, the green, if we work with our carbon footprint. On the right, if we don't do anything. It's a little bit daunting just looking at that. Okay, so we're not going to have a study on that. It was just a pinpoint where we know we exist currently. So at the next slide, we're going to show you that the green and the red again, green with our attention to the carbon footprint, the red with nothing. You can see here how much faster it pushes us into the dates for floraison, veraison, and the calendar dates are there at the bottom. They're in French, but just to give you an idea here of how much that's advanced, especially when we get to 2100, the year 2100. Okay, so that's the impact on the vine development. And the next slide, just our quick evolution of temperatures. And this is a little bit of detail from Germany. And it's pretty much hand in hand, the exact same with Bordeaux. You know, what we're seeing here, this increase of temperatures rising, creating that intense warmth. And if you kind of look at the last bullet point, if you remember historically with Germany, up to the 1970s, we were barely hitting minimum ripeness. You know, it was a challenge to do so. And it was really one or two vintages in a decade where we had fantastic ripeness. That was the anomaly. It's totally a different situation now. We've got mostly warmer years on average. You know, looking back at their data, since 88, the only exceptions, 96 and 06. That's a crazy thought if you just think about that, the exceptions. So we've totally flipped this focus on how we achieve ripeness simply because we are experiencing warmer climate. All right, and on to the next slide. We can see this too here with our grapes. So on the left-hand side, you'll see that coloration again with Bordeaux and that study. And you know, they've got the grapes listed. Merlot is the purple, Cab Sauvignon is the red there, and then Cab Franc is the green. And if you look at the calendar at the bottom, I know it's a little small if you've got a smaller computer, that dark gray line at the bottom is the calendar. And it's pushing that, picking all of this ripeness, this need to start harvest early at a much faster rate. That's what we're seeing there on the Bordeaux side. With the German side, what I think is pretty crazy, they're already looking at these new grapes that we would have never thought would have ripened in Germany. For instance, Cab Sauvignon, Merlot, Syrah, maybe even Viognier. So there's tiny plantings of this, but they're working out so far. And I think that's an alarm enough to keep that in mind. 15 years ago, we would have never thought of this. So we'll keep venturing on to our next slide here. That was really just our basic foundation. We don't need a lot to know that we're in the midst of this. I think we see it every harvest, every growing season, every year is a complete different set of challenges. So with that in mind, we're going to start to weave in our amazing panel here to really talk about what they're experiencing firsthand. We'll hear from them. So Pauline, what we have here on this slide is just a few details that we've discussed previously, but I'm going to just kind of leave it in your hands based on what you think is most important in the vineyard for all of our esteemed attendees to hear, in your opinion, what you're experiencing.
Yes, I think climate change is changing, of course, our way to harvest and to think about ripeness.
Uh-oh, your volume. I'm not hearing you right now. Anyone else? There we go.
Is it okay now?
Yes.
Sorry. I'll try to speak a bit louder. So yes, I was just saying that vintages after vintages, we can see that we think of ripeness the other way around. Before, when my father was a wine grower, he was stressed about having grapes ripe enough. And I'm stressed about having grapes not too ripe, which is quite a different way to think. So in terms of harvest, we are more focused on acidity levels than sugar levels in terms of taking the decision to go or not to go to harvest a plot. Then we have to underline the fact that we work with perennial plants. So we are planting a vineyard for 30, 50, hopefully 70 years. And right now, I took over the vineyard in 2018, and we are planting mostly Cabernet Sauvignon and Petit Verdot for the red grapes, rather than Merlot, for example, which is the historical grape in my region. And in terms of rootstock, because the water resource might be a question, especially if you work organically or try to if you have a competition with grass. So it means more rootstocks with which are a bit more productive in order to be able to cope with this stress, which is completely unusual. So this is really long term and year after year. And climate change means as well very unusual and impactful events, such as frost in April. For example, this April, 1 week before, we were eating outside and having 80 degrees Fahrenheit outside. And the week after, it was freezing. So this is completely unusual, and we have to rethink about, for example, the pruning dates, and so all the vineyard management is a bit has to be managed and thought differently with the climate change.
And I know, Pauline, you have also said, really looking at these grapes that you have planted, rethinking some of them, like you mentioned, Cab Sauvignon and Petit Verdot, but also Semillon now. You've got some extraordinary old vine Semillon that is showing incredible resistance and power to kind of persevere these erratic changes. Tell everyone a little bit about that.
Yes, thanks for talking about Sémillon. So Sémillon is a historical grape in Bordeaux. It might come from Saint-Émilion, Sémillon, we don't really know, but for sure it was planted, it's very historic in Bordeaux. And I think 20 years ago, it was maybe hard to get for, at least I'm talking about dry whites. Jean-Jacques knows much more than me about sweet wines, but I'm talking Sémillon in dry whites. We were a bit sometimes low in sugar and a bit neutral in terms of taste. And right now, like climate change in that respect might be an opportunity for dry whites in Bordeaux, because we are harvesting Sémillon, which have like a deepness, structure, a texture that are just crazy. Last vintages, 16, 18, 19, 20, like beautiful and dry summers and ripe Sémillon. So yeah, it's a historic grape, but which might also have a key role in the coming years.
Wonderful. And before we move on to Christian, tell everyone where Orient is located in Bordeaux.
So Orient is the southeast of Bordeaux. If you see the Garonne River, there is a beautiful region along the river, which is called Cadillac Côte de Bordeaux. Cadillac is the name of the village nearby, and it's all hills and nice slopes facing the river with beautiful clay and limestone, beautiful slopes, southeast exposure, on which we used to make historically a lot of sweet wines, and on which we do nowadays mostly beautiful fruity red wines. And it's a region you should discover, because it's mostly family-run estates with beautiful, affordable wines.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. All right, so that was our view in the vineyards with Bordeaux. And now, Christian, we'll come to our next slide here to have you give us a little bit of the backdrop with Germany and your perspective in the vineyards.
Yeah,
and maybe, Christian, maybe tell everyone in the beginning where you're located. I think it's good for them to know exactly where before we really start. Thank you.
No worries, my pleasure. So hello, everybody. So the Weingut Daudel winery is a small family-run business. I always say that I've got 2 employees. One is my mother and the other one is my father, and that's pretty much it. So it's really quite small winery. I know we are located in the south of Germany, near Stuttgart. Most of the people maybe know Stuttgart because of Mercedes and Porsche, but actually we're not only doing nice cars, we can also make beautiful wines. And so it's just about 10 minutes north of the city called Stuttgart. So it's the wine region, it's called Württemberg. So we are actually the wine region in Germany with the highest amount of red wine. So traditionally, red wine always played a very important role in our culture. But of course, also like Rieslings and white wines in general, it's about 30% to 40%. So it's also very important, of course. But if you compare it to the other wine regions in Germany, red wine is something very important for us, definitely.
And
yeah.
Go ahead. I was going to just have you talk about a little bit of these details here. These are really linked to you with some of your tactics, like the tea and the nettle extract to help reduce the vine stress, and the self-made compost that you're working with. You know, not taking off too much of the leaf canopy, keeping some of that for shade. Just your kind of tricks in the vineyard that you discovered have allowed you to mitigate this climate shift.
Well, definitely. I mean, there is definitely the climate shift also arrived here. I mean, in former days in Germany, it was all about sugar. The higher the sugar, the higher the quality. And in nowadays, it's sugar level is not at all interesting anymore. It's not the quality level than it has used to be like this. So when my father started going into the vineyards to harvest the grapes, I'm the 14th generation. The harvest usually started at the end of October, beginning of October, and ended somehow in November. And in the last years, we finished in August, September. So we not even harvested any grapes in October. So this is one point. Of course, you need to in former days, we always were focusing on the higher sugar, the better it gets. And nowadays, of course, you need to get the perfect ripe fruit without having overripe fruit. And so you need to get the perfect picking day. That's very, very important. But besides that, what we have in nowadays is that the weather periods are much more long lasting. So like in former days, if there was some rainfall, then of course, a couple of weeks later, you have sunny days. And in nowadays, things are a little bit different. So generally, of course, we also have to think about like rootstocks that don't need too much of the wines, because for example, if you have like in nowadays, the vegetation period starts very early, then also you have much more frost danger, because it's possible that you get frost problems, and all these things they kind of stress the vines. So you need to find solutions to put the vines back in a comfort zone and to keep the balance in the vines. So that's why for us, more or less all the work and all the reaction to the climate change has to be done in the vines.
Thank you. That was perfect. And you know, I was also hearing some growers from Bordeaux talk about if the frost comes really early in the season, when there's less of a bud break, they can actually mitigate that a little easier than if the frost comes later. So I thought that was a good point to keep in mind too, with when the frost actually happens these days. So we'll come back to a little bit more on that, but thank you so much, Christian. I think we just have our next slide is to wrap up a little bit of the review on this. And I think we've really covered everything. I think one little detail I would draw attention to is rethinking that plot location. I've learned both with Bordeaux and Germany, now what they're looking at is maybe historically those famous plots are not the easiest to mitigate with the climate shift. That most of those in a lot of zones, especially when we were worried about ripeness, were in the southwest facing. Now I know with Germany, they're looking at more northerly locations to kind of mitigate that and offset this intense, rapidly rising temperature that they're seeing. And I know that there's been a lot of discussion in Bordeaux, especially across all of Bordeaux, with as much technological advance they can use to plot each section and really learn about what works best plot to plot. So I think that's the last thing I would mention in terms of the vineyard. Biodiversity wraps all that in, but I think we'll keep going and seeing here on the next slide, we'll move now to the cellar, and we have Alexander to kind of take us through. I'm just making sure we didn't skip anything. So we're here now in the cellar. I know, Alexander, you've got some ideas too with the vineyard, so it's not isolated. What you do in the cellar definitely is a response to what came from the grapes in the vineyard. So with that kind of idea of being in the cellar and mitigating, not excluding fully the vineyard, take us through some of the tricks you guys are using in the cellar to mitigate this climate shift.
Yeah, yes, Laura, I'm happy to do. First of all, I would like to say, even so, we're located a bit more southwest of where Christian is, near Stuttgart. We're, let's say, an hour south of Frankfurt, which is quite well known in the US. 25 kilometers south of Mannheim, where also a lot of troops were located. And it's very similar to what Christian mentioned already, you know, with timing, butt breaking, you know, the surface, the condition of the grapes. I thought it was a very good expression, you know, that the well-being of the grapes has to be, you know, in the vineyard in the first place, otherwise you're not reaching anything, yeah? Coming to a more technical aspect, just speaking of what happens in the cellar nowadays, Legenmüller is a split of 50 white and 50 red, with mainly Riesling and on the red side, Pinot Noir. So both are German varietals which are well known, I would say worldwide, yeah, Riesling and Pinot Noir. Picking time is really going forward heavily. It could be 3 to 4 weeks earlier than it was 10 years ago, not just a generation, even 10 years ago. And it heavily reflects, you know, what the summer and the weather in August has been. Yeah, today was a perfect day if I look outside. Yeah, blue skies, daylight temperature around 2 p.m. this afternoon, 26. And we are expecting another chilly night, which goes down to 14 to 60 degree in our area. This is just perfect, you know. I mean, this is how it should be, so to say, yeah. And in the beginning of our session, you know, when we had the sheet, you know, with generally speaking, yeah, climate change, higher temperatures, yeah, we fully agree. This is the case, but still, we should not forget, you know, that any area in Germany is compared to Bordeaux, at least 1,100 kilometers strict north. So we have changes, you know, between the Bordeaux region as such, you know, and certainly, you know, like here, you could say, take Württemberg, take Pfalz, Mosel, Rheingau. Each and every area has its specialties, so to say, its little tricks, yeah, to really adapt, you know, the best method and the best technique, you know, to the local situation. So low yields is an important point. I started out with early picking. Yes, it has to be selective. So you go out to the vineyards every other morning and really check the situation. You have an analysis in the laboratory. You know exactly what you're doing, so to say, from day to day. You're not just checking randomly things. No, you have certain spots marked in the vineyard. So every morning you really take the same analysis in the same spot. That's at least Legenmüller. And the ripeness indication, you know, sugar and so on. Yeah, Christian mentioned that before. It's really due to the earlier picking dates, to the earlier harvest. It has a kind of, I described it as yellowish green instead of golden amber. So you're looking at, you know, at the goal to achieve fresh, fruity, well-balanced wines. A generation ago, the style of wines, and mostly white wines at that time, were totally different to what we have here today. Yeah, the grape processing start, you know, with, in our area, we're not too hilly side, you know, it's not flat land, it's a rolling landscape, you know, where the vineyards are always facing south or southwest. Yeah, the villages are in the lower ends here, and then the vineyards come up again. So you could say grape picking, depending on the condition of the vineyards, yeah, and the location. In our case, 70% by machine today. High standard, top of the art, with even a selective belt on top of the machine, you know, where the grape sizes, the sugar level is sorted automatically on a table. So you have 2, 3, 4 kinds, up to 4 kinds, you know, of quality designations picking at the same time, and you end up, with 4 different qualities, to bring into the cellar. Temperature is most important, and in hot days, a hot day I would say is anything above 22 degree for us here. Needs to be cooling the grapes prior to pressing. Even on fully closed, checkered, fermented, checkered covered grape presses, pneumatic systems, just up to 0.8 bar, very, very soft, and this is really key, to come to the best juice result before you go into fermentation. I mentioned that we in Germany have a certain wine law, of course, built into the EU regulations. But you put in a 100 kilos, you can press out of the result 70 kilo resulted in liters of juice, and you have to leave off going outside to the field again, more or less 30%, which is the mark, the so-called mark. That comes, like with Christian said, back to the vineyards, building up the humus. This is very, very similar to what we have heard already. We're fermenting the white wines in stainless steel, temperature controlled, really temperature nowadays between around 16 to 18 degree, not more, for the fermentation process. The fermentation could go up to 4-6 weeks. You really can fiddle around here with a lot of technique at these times. Reds are mostly in tonneau and 250 liter barrique, French oak, German oak from the nearby Palatine forests, which cover our vineyards to the west. From the west, most of the weather changes come into the game. So what Christian said, it's not necessarily like in the old days that you had summer with no rain. No, it could be a day of rain, it could be a week of sunshine or vice versa. Most important, next to the very early stage, nowadays, even in early May, for blooming bud spring is then the ripening season, starting by the end of July, maybe, depending on the conditions of the temperatures, and goes into late August, yeah? Nowadays, you could say for the last 5-6 years, I'd say 8th of September, 10th of September is the date where the picking really starts. I remember one year when our daughter was studying in the Champagne, we brought her back after the summer holidays, and it was the 12th or the 13th of August, and more or less, I said, what is this? Look at the site when you enter into Ras, yeah? All the little white cars in the vineyard, So one varietal for the Champagne was already totally harvested and in the cellar. So I was saying, no, if this goes on like this, and we're just 300 kilometers from to the west from the Champagne, if this goes on, then we might see in Pfalz, in the more southerly regions of Germany, yeah, it could happen, picking starting as of August, yeah. But so far, I'd say we're safe into September. But a generation back, I grew up in the wine family, we were in the vineyards, yes, we cut grapes. We had day and night, and it was mid of November when we finished harvest, and nowadays we don't, as Christian said already, might not even see October. This is really differing from what it was a generation, even as I said before, 10 years ago. Yeah.
Thank you. Lots of information. Wonderful. And I think it just gives us a kind of a backdrop to how connected the vineyard is to the cellar. Obviously, everything you were trying to do in the vineyard, and allow the cellar work to carry through. So I think now, Jean-Jacques, we definitely know that your father has done lots of work in terms of setting and, you know, the identity and the cellar and Sauvignon Blanc, the whites. Carry us through a little bit about what you're continuing with the cellar work to make sure that your caliber quality is the highest, despite all the challenges that kind of come your way with this climate shift.
Thank you everyone for this very interesting talk and presentation. I'm Jean-Jacques Dubourdieu, so I'm the General Manager of Denis Dubourdieu Domaine. It's about 6 estates in Bordeaux, in the Grave region, Côte de Bordeaux, just beside Pauline, and also in Barsac, where all the story of our family started 1 century ago. As you know, as you told before, my father was also very involved in the research, especially around white wine winemaking and the Sauvignon Blanc aroma. About global warming, and a lot of things has been told before. Maybe I can deliver you some example of the evolution. I remember in our family estate Château Renon in Côte de Bordeaux, my father starts the skin contact maceration to demonstrate that it was an interesting way to increase the aroma content, but in another way to decrease the total acidity. So in the 80s, in Château Renon, we were used to have a skin contact about 1 night. So we were harvesting the day before. We were keeping the skin and the juice all together in a tank or in a press machine during the day of harvesting and the night, and we were pressing the day after. Right now, so 30 years after, the skin contact, we still do the skin contact, but it's more about 3 or 4 hours, because we don't need to decrease the total acidity anymore and to increase the pH. So actually, it's interesting evolution in terms of enological process. 30 years ago, the skin contact was compulsory and kind of long. Now it's just it's last the time that we are loading the press, and that's all. So it's about 10 hours less. So of course, as you all say just before, the analysis of the grapes we harvest now is completely different. It's difficult. Before, it was very easy to get pH with Sauvignon Blanc in Bordeaux below 3. Now, when we have 3.1 or 3.2 pH, it's really well done. So things have completely changed. Also, what we can observe that 20 years ago, we were widely de-leafing the Sauvignon Blanc and also the Semillon to be sure to reach the maturity. I would say since 5, maybe a little bit more, 5 years and even more, we are not de-leafing anymore the Sauvignon Blanc, and we reach the maturity, and we are also, as everybody, harvesting a bit earlier. So last year, to give you an idea, we harvested the Sauvignon Blanc in Renon in August 19. But in 03, during the canicule, during the very warm year and summer, we harvest Sauvignon Blanc in Renon August 17. So we are more and more harvesting in August the Sauvignon Blanc that we were harvesting before end of the first week of September. So it's a reality, but when we adapt all the process, we more or less keep the same balance. Also, I think we had a very long reflection about aging. We were in the past more systematically using more new oak, about 1/3 of New York, fermentation included. Now we are using less than 15%, sometimes 10%, and less barrel, more and more oak vats to minimize and to decrease the surface contact and to increase the impression and the impression of freshness. So I would say that from the beginning in the history, men and women in the winemaking always adapt their process to keep the style. So of course, maybe the style is evolving a bit, but I think one part of our job is adapting ourselves to the condition. And right now, the condition is global warming, and we have to adapt our process to keep the style, our style of Sauvignon Blanc or our blend Semillon, Sauvignon, and Clos Floriden made our fame and success. And if we make now a completely different wine, I believe that our consumer gonna get lost. So that's why we try to adapt ourselves to keep the style. One of the adaptation also, it's more concerning red, but it's an example. 20 years ago, Petit Verdot was the black sheep in Bordeaux because it was difficult to reach maturity with these grapes. It was very fragile, very sensitive to botrytis, so it was the impossible grapes. Right now, we realize that Petit Verdot, with the weather we have now, is always reaching the maturity. It's less sensitive to mildew, which is interesting in a more organic process. So little by little, we realize also that we have in our tools, in our old tools, also a lot of solution. So it's another example of adaptation, I would say.
Thank you, Jean-Jacques. And I'm so glad you brought up the mildew, because I do know it's such a intense pressure, as well as additional diseases that are becoming challenging because the temperature's warming, the humidity is increasing. But there's still challenges with water at the right time when you need water. So it's just such an erratic set of conditions that you're working with. Okay, so I think now this next slide is just kind of reiterating some of those details that we talked about. And the only little bit I'd add here is that I do know that part of this is selection of yeast, trying to make sure that that alcohol is mitigated as much as possible, but maybe adding a little bit more glycerol, less alcohol per se. So you're getting that roundness and feel, the mouth feel that you need, but without the additional degree of alcohol. I know that's being looked at in Bordeaux too, specifically. Okay, so we'll keep moving on to styles now and how this has impacted your kind of signature style. And I know you all have touched on that a little bit, but I guess just the sounding board here and my personal feel on this is that the caliber of quality has never been higher than right now. So in terms of style and this kind of modern open approach, I feel that is a positive if we can work through the challenges of climate, but it's also exacerbated this extraordinary quality per price point for by the glass, for affordable retail. So it doesn't matter if we're talking on premise or off premise in our industry, our market. So I think we'll come back to you, Pauline. Would you like to begin this discussion? Your thoughts on the style?
Yes, I totally agree with you that it might be, we don't have to fear what's, I mean, I'm sure we have a strong winemaking industry, of course, in Germany and in Bordeaux, and people are here. There are thousands of people working in that industry in this region. And as Jean-Jacques said, we'll do our best to adapt. But frankly, looking at the last vintages we have, It's like we have beautiful 2015, 16, 18, 19, 20. What can, I mean, it's in a way, I said I started in 2018. September, when I was a child, was very often a poor month with a lot of rain. Nowadays, it's like sunny and dry. We have perfect conditions to harvest. We enter in the cellar healthy grapes. We can work without sulfur or with very low levels of sulfur. So it's, in a way, we are showing nowadays the fruity side of Bordeaux, which is great, I think.
Fantastic. Exactly. Yay. Wonderful. So I know I kind of set you up for that with ease, but that's kind of my take too, just in the marketplace, purchasing and encouraging consumers to rethink these. Christian, let's turn it over to you. I'm curious, in Württemberg, especially with all this focus on red wines, how has your style adapted? Because I know, you know, Lemberger can have some tenacity to it depending on how it's produced and the climate, etc. So how, with your reds, and I know you do different reds too, what are you seeing in terms of style, reds, whites, just in general?
Well, to be fair, I think that generally I think Germany somehow definitely so far did profit from the climate change. So I mean, in former days, you always had to wait longer and longer and longer to get the sugar level, and then finally maybe you got botrytis or whatever, and you needed to pick the grapes. If I look at the last vintages, it was more that you really could choose when you would like to pick the grapes, you know. So in this case, it's definitely quite comfortable. And on the other hand, of course, we discussed quite intense what we are doing to, on the other hand, go to deal with the problems that are come with. But if you can deal with it, you can also profit from the new situation. And I mean, if I think about the reds we're doing, of course, in former days, you had vintages like the one we had in the last 10 years, like every decade or something. And then nowadays, you really constantly have like one great vintage after the other. So for the reds and also for the whites, it's still, so if I look at the last vintages, there's no vintage that I would say that this was kind of not a good one, or we really had serious problem with something, which you definitely had if you're going back to the 70s or back to the 60s. Of course, there were also vintages where it was you had too much acidity levels, and maybe in bad vintages, the reds were very light and not that as powerful as they are in nowadays. And we are still a very northern region, so we're still a cool climate region. So we still can keep easily the freshness and the acidity and everything we are looking for. But on the other hand, it's definitely more potential and more depth in the reds. And yeah, so definitely we are. If I'm looking at the last 10 years, for us, we can't complain. It's just the question where we'll be in the next 30 years or 20 years. So that's more, what's the end of this road, you know?
Very good point. So now let's see. I guess, Jean-Jacques, do you want to just step in? You've talked a little bit about style, and then we'll come back to Alexander. I have a question on Alexander. I'll get to that in just a moment. But Jean-Jacques, you've talked about this shift in style and trying to maintain kind of what you're known for, the identity, the consumers that already love your products. Are you noticing that they're still receptive to what you're producing? They're enjoying it, even if it is a little bit more approachable right now? How do you feel this is impacting you, this climate shift with the style and your signature?
I have to say that global warming is more or less, if we are not exaggerating, helping us in the first step, I would say. Because 10 years ago or 20 years ago, we had difficult vintages in Bordeaux with a lot of rain, with quite snowy August months, and it was difficult to make interesting wine. So right now we more have to drive the car safely, but in a way it's helping. As long as we keep our identity, our style, even if maybe the style is a bit more mature, but as long as we keep balance, freshness, the taste of the place, the taste of the fruit, I believe that things are continuing quite well. And now we are a bit, we have a bit a specific situation in Bordeaux because we produce on our 6th estate 50% of dry white, which is quite uncommon in Bordeaux, where Bordeaux is about 92% of red. And whites in all our dry white in all our estate in Noisy-den, in Château-Renaud, in Clos-Floriden are still the flagship of the estate. And actually we are missing wine, but we keep 20 years ago a very neat direction for the style. So once again, it's a question of taste, and every winemaker do what he wants. But we believe that Sauvignon Blanc has to have the taste of Sauvignon Blanc, and Sémillon on limestone has to have a very sharp style. So we were always into that, and as long as we change just a bit the process, even with the global warming, for the moment, we keep the style. So for the moment, even if like all winemakers in all region, we try to have the most organic process as possible, and as I precise in the little presentation, we grow forest inside and outside the estate. We are involved on energetical independence in terms of electricity and water, and I think we are at our little scale quite concerned about environment. But I would say that for the moment, style due to the global warming is not a problem for the moment, but it could be a problem within 5, 10, or 15 years.
Fantastic, thank you. And then Alexander, I wanted you to definitely comment on that too, but since you have so much Pinot Noir, I know that Pinot Noir can be delicate in terms of growing and really finicky. And I know it's kind of a jigsaw puzzle in terms of keeping leaves to allow some shade, working not to de-leaf too much. But are you finding that sometimes you have some sunburn on those Pinot Noir clusters that you have to work with and try to avoid bitterness? Or, how is that affecting? I've pointed that question to your red wines, really. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, we heard a lot of things, with my pre-commenters here before, I think we have to really obey nature. Sustainability is the thing to really look at, if this is certified or just a man's practice. Yeah, it's really so important. Yeah, and this is especially for the Pinot Noir grid in the same way. Yeah, of course, it's a different way of looking through the vineyard year, with the steps when you adopt what. That was different, even 5 years ago, 10 years ago, yeah, in order to ripen them to the full max, yeah. Now, you have to be very, very careful at the time of, green harvests to 5, 10, 15%, The leaf management is most important, exactly, not to have them ruined by sunburn and so on. Yeah, then the temperature control on all the way through is damn important. Yeah, but what Chuck said before, you know, we have a customer, we have a connoisseur, and we have a day-to-day, yeah, I should say, consumer who loves its bottle of wine for lunch, for dinner, you know, throughout the day. And we have the, you know, upscale, and we have the day-to-day wines, you know. So you have to really establish, you know, within your 120 hectare at Legenmüller, you have different tiers. You have about 300 slots, individual slots, in an area stretched out of 15 kilometers in the Pfalz region. And you really have to have a vision when the vineyard year starts, and you have to have a plan, you know, how to go for that in order to, of course, make the most out of your experience. Yeah, having in mind what style of wine you want to get at the end of the day, you know, to really make your consumer happy. Yeah, and before the consumer can enjoy your bottle of wine, you have to have the certain goalkeepers in our industry, and like you know, the SOMs, you know, the advisors, and so on. You know, I'm not talking much more about this. You know, just one thing. like Jean-Jacques, in the Lergenmüller family, there are 5 estates, even in different regions in Germany. Yeah, one is Pfalz, one is Rheingau, the other one is Mosel. So we really have, besides the Pinot, also excellent Rieslings in different tiers. And the Grand Cru from our vineyard Ziegelsberg in Rheingau just was nominated at the International Wine Challenge in London as the best German white and as the best international Riesling, 2 trophies. So that tells you a lot. It's important, you know, that you create your own style, that you really do a permanent training with your staff, that they all got the same idea, you know, when they're out in the vineyard, when there is a certain lot of wine to be done in the cellar. It's a lot of creation, it's a lot of nature, and I think this is where our heartbeat really sits in. And we are very happy to have lots of consumers who love our wines. And of course, it's every day the most important factor, you know, that we stay to a certain style, you know, which we're known for. And I think this is the success in the long term.
Thank you. That was great. And I know, just coming back to our presentation here for just a second, really, this is just segueing in. Alexander set us up perfectly for the Tips for the Wine program and what that means with the wine list. And so moving to the next slide here, you're going to see, these are just some of my ideas in terms of this extraordinary quality at every price point. We know these growers are great examples of you know, fun everyday styles, but very serious, extraordinary high-end styles too. It gives us something to offer every kind of client that comes our way, whether that's in the restaurant or at retail. And with specific on-premise, the BTG, by the glass options, I mean, this is just a playing ground now. You know, it's a gold mine in terms of what you can find for the great price. So now that we are hopefully behind without dealing with tariffs anymore, fingers crossed, that really does give us a lot to work with in terms of offering our clients, our guests, the ability to taste these extraordinary wines firsthand. And then retail too. It really just shows you that your preconceived notion of sometimes being a little bit more expensive doesn't always have to be the case now that this caliber of quality has risen so much. The crowd-pleasing styles, they're immediately gratifying when your clients purchase, go home and drink. The last thing I would point out is that reminding your clients that both Germany and Bordeaux are so earth-friendly geared, and I think that's important. We're seeing that with a lot of younger consumers, that the environment may be more important to them in a buying decision than some of the other segmentation for consumers. But nonetheless, I think it's a great add-on to encouraging someone to try, because we do need to keep the earth in mind and what we're doing. So with that, we're kind of wrapping up here. We're going to come to the Q&A, but before we do that, just a real fast reminder here, the next seminar, that is going to be with a dear friend of mine, Jesse Becker. That's on July 28th, and he's going to talk about rosé, which is such a fun topic for both of not only Germany and some of the areas that you don't think about, but definitely Bordeaux too. So extraordinary rosé across the board. I think it's kind of fun to see that in Europe, it's just as popular as it is in America. You may not know that in France, rosé has overtaken white wine in consumption, volume of consumption. It's kind of a crazy twist. So we'll have that seminar on July 28th. The other little detail, you are going to receive a survey, and we're wanting you to fill this out, but also because there's going to be a VIP seminar in November. And with each of these webinars, we're pulling 2 of those surveys out from a drawing, and you're in a very small group for that November wine tasting, and you'll receive some wines to go along with that. So that's the reason to go ahead and fill out the survey. Those will be random drawings. So 2 from each of these webinars to get a total of 22 for the November kind of ultra elite wine tasting that we're going to offer. Now, I think we've covered all the housekeeping. We're just curious here if you have any other questions. I know the experts have been handling those. I have watched some come and go, but at this time, are there any questions you'd like to just ask? You know, we'll have the experts watching here, the growers. I'm watching too. Anything that you want to ask here? I'm going to pull up the chat just a little bit so I can see it. I know that I've got John on the line too, helping. Did we skip anything that we should come back to? John, pipe in if you see something. I know that there was a question here. Are rosés more difficult with the rising temperatures? That's going to be covered. And I know that there's definitely some techniques about that. But I think that we're going to force you to stay tuned for the next webinar and come and learn, because that's going to definitely be a key factor on that. And so I'm not able to see fully here some of the other questions. You guys help me out if you're seeing anything.
Yeah, hey Laura, we had one. This is JD from Sepexa. We had one from William a while back, just saying, and I thought it was a really interesting question that we could put over to everybody, and we had some quick answers done. But it was, what are the shifts that we're seeing with the alcohol levels, and with the progression of having to harvest earlier, and what has that really done for the alcohol levels, acidity, and a few of the other things? So would love to just kind of throw that out to everybody and what they're seeing with their local areas.
Who would like to start? I know everyone's just aiming for that.
In our case, for the reds, we are now selling vintage 2018, which is between like around 14 degrees, 14.2. And vintage 98 was a bit below 13. So it's frank, like it's a big question, and how to manage this in the cellar is, but we see a real shift in terms of alcohol level, at least in the red wines.
And Pauline, let me ask, are you feeling that alcohol, or is your total acidity or pH helping to balance that still? You're not feeling the weight of that, even though the degree is rising a little. That was my take. I was in Bordeaux it's been only a week, I've been home now. So that was my feel, and tasting a lot of these newer vintages, that the alcohol was there, but it was really well hidden because the balance was so fantastic.
Yes, I agree. Like alcohol, as long as it's balanced with acidity, it's okay. And it really depends on the vintage, but fortunately enough, most of the summers, it's concentration which is acting. So acidity and alcohol are balancing each other.
Perfect.
So yeah.
That was my take. Would either Christian or Alexander like to comment on the German side?
Yeah, I mean, if you say, you know, alcohol and climate, as we said, temperature going up, you know, climate change, I think there are options in order to really work with the Pinot Noirs on 13.5. We are tending, you know, if with the regulations on what alcohol degree you have to put on the label, you know, to really put rather, especially for the northern markets, Scandinavia, Japan, but Canada, US is in the same way. We'd rather strive for putting 13.5 on the label rather than 14. That just takes a little measures, you know. It's the same ripeness of the grapes, it's the same vineyard, yeah. But it is important that with the historic styles, you know, of heavy, bitter, and then yes, alcohol, you know, and then you say, okay, if it is really well made, you know, if the right steps are taken, if the measures are there, you not necessarily feel the alcohol, you know, as being in the focus. Yeah, it's really the kind of you know, concentration, you know, acidity levels, you know, and so on, you know, well made, as Pauline said. Yeah, so I would say, yeah, don't be afraid of the alcohol, or first taste the wines, you know, maybe you enjoy a second sip, you know, before you argue about the alcohol. And if
Great.
you want to go with lower alcohol, yeah, then there are options today, I think, in all of our regions. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's a really good point. Sometimes we don't expect that balance to be so precise and beautifully crafted, but that is one detail that I've noticed, not only with Bordeaux, but Germany too. You know, we're getting better at seeing the balance come into play so that one of those points doesn't stand out in isolation. It's really well integrated. Christian, I don't know if you want to add anything in terms of different grapes that are red in Germany.
No, I just wanted to actually underline what Alexander just said about the alcohol level. It's not about numbers; it's about the balance, and that's the. But on the other hand, that's the most important thing. We're not tasting numbers, but on the other hand, for us, I think as we are still quite northern wine region, the entire Germany, the total sugar levels are usually don't need to be that high. So we. It's more about the old thinking that the higher the sugar level is, the better the quality is. But this is wrong. And for our reds, we all work with open fermenters. So there's also much alcohol that is just disappears during the fermentation. So usually even in very, very warm vintages, like for example, 2018 was a very warm vintage in Germany. It was not necessarily any problem, because if it would be too high a sugar level, we always have already picked before the Pinot Noir anyway, because the style of the fruit would go in the completely different direction we are looking for.
Thank you. And Jean-Jacques,
Hey,
I don't
Laura.
want to out. Yep. You have anything, John?
Yeah, and actually, I think this is a great question to be able to go over to Jean-Jacques. Is Jamie Apuna had a great question, kind of building off of Jean-Jacques' allusion to the Petit Verdot having an opportunity to shine with a lot of the changes, and if there's any other varietals that they have interest in across the board as we look towards the future.
Actually, in Bordeaux, in the official tools that we have, we don't have a lot of other solution. I'm not completely convinced by very exotic grapes coming from other country, because I really believe in the taste from the place, and since centuries we work on that in Bordeaux. But I'm more convinced by the place where we can plant, for example, dry white. During the past, the north exposure wasn't planted in Bordeaux. Now the north exposure are really interesting. As well, north exposure on limestone in some places because of the frost, because of the maturity level, was difficult to grow. And now these terroirs, these areas are becoming very interesting. So once again, I think with what we have, we can adapt ourselves and continue to make great wine. And we won't. I mean, if by fighting against global warming we lose the style, I'm not sure that is a good solution, because once again, when we are winemaker, we are selling a taste from a place or from a fruit. So if we change every time the blending, I think it's going to be difficult for the producer and even more difficult for the consumer. So I don't want to be too stubborn saying that, but I think we have more to win by adapt our historical grapes like Petit Verdot, because Petit Verdot is nothing new. It's just an old stuff that we restyle because now with the condition it's easier, but actually it's part of our history. And I really believe in local grapes more than an exotic grapes coming from somewhere else without a really story. Maybe it's a very conservative point of view, but it's really my feeling.
Thank you. And I've heard that from so many growers in Bordeaux that's their quest right now, is to work with what we have. You know, they're embracing the fact that the laws are allowing experimentation and just the thought around that, but they don't want to lose what the historic has been. But I think now we're out of time, and I just want to thank everyone that's joined us, as well as all these amazing growers for your time, your expertise, your insight. It's been so valuable. I always learn too as I sit here and weave us through this. So thank you so very much. To the attendees, just that final reminder of filling out your survey. You never know if you'll end up with some wines, and the invitation to join in November for the VIP seminar. And then, of course, don't forget about the rosé coming up. So thank you so much. Thanks, Sopexa, for all your work. Both Wines of Germany, Bordeaux, really appreciate it. And we hope you've had fun and learned. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks again. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.